This is a treat for me because I get to spend some time with my friend Andrew, and it's not a Sunday morning.
Yes.
But, you know, we can even indulge in a little ersatz red wine.
Good health.
And, you know, usually you're serving me. But it is lovely to have you here.
It's good to be here.
But you'll detect the accent. Native Melburnian, or that's where you spent
native
the bulk
Melburnian,
of your native Melburnian?
English mother and an Australian father, Melbourne-born father.
How did they meet?
They met at the front door of my grandmother's house. My father used to, in those days, insurance salesman went door to door, and he used to catch the eye of this young woman who was the daughter of the woman he was doing business with, and discovered she played tennis and he played tennis and they played tennis and so forth. 7-year courtship, and well, she went out and taught in the country and all that sort of thing.
Isn't that wonderful? And,
yeah.
But how did you get over here to New York City, where I met you?
Well, it's a long story, because back in the 70s, I had 60s and 70s, I had 4 influential teachers, all of whom had doctorates from General Seminary in New York City, and sowed the seed of this amazing institution. And one particular one kept on at me and saying, you ought to do some postgraduate work once you're ordained. And one day the Archbishop of Melbourne met me on the street and said, have you thought of doing postgraduate work somewhere? And I said, yes, I have actually. I said, in New York City. And he said, I'll fund it. And he did.
And what year was this?
1983. So I came and did a year and did what's called Master of Sacred Theology, 83, 84. When New York was rather a different place than it is today, but still it was New York City. And it was a wonderful experience, and I was able to do some work and to read and to just to be in a different place. And I'd done 12 years parish ministry. It was a wonderful sort of mid-ministry opportunity. So I fell in love with the city. You either love it or hate it, and I loved it. And so that sowed the seed then for future possibilities.
Well, now you're in New York.
And now I'm in New York. I've been here 10 years and love it and settled in.
What's amazing to me is I'm always remarking on how many Australians are in New York City. And I spoke with Bloomberg's publicity office about this, and it wasn't in the top 5, but it was definitely in the top 10 of the most adventurous tourists in New York City were the Australians. Do you find yourself running into them?
Yeah, I do. I went to a function the other day, the Australian Governor General was in town, and at the Harvard Club, and there would have been on a Tuesday morning about 300 or 400 Australians, from Hugh Jackman to me, and a few others, all there, welcoming the Governor General and being Australians, and so from all walks of life. It's very interesting. You know.
And Hugh is a darling, darling man. Yeah, did you get to spend any time with him?
I talked to him briefly and was photographed with him, and Deborah Lee Furness was there, his wife, and so. You know,
so you're hanging out with Hugh Jackman, the Governor General. You know, you're now a high-profile Aussie in New York.
And the fact that I've been here 10 years, people get to know that, and you meet people, and it's amazing who comes to church. You don't expect. You know, had the former Premier of Victoria, Jeff Kenner, came to Christmas and came to midnight mass, and it's amazing that people turn up through recommendations of friends or whatever, and it's nice. It's sort of like a little Australian outpost.
Malcolm Turnbull will show up. I have faith that he will turn up.
Oh, I'll wait and see.
The Church of the Transfiguration is also known as the Actors' Church. Explain that.
It began in 1870, all over a funeral. Joseph Jefferson, a famous actor of the day, his friend George Holland died, and he went to organise a funeral at a local Episcopal church which no longer exists. I have to hastily add, which was in Madison Avenue, and the rector was of a particular persuasion that when he discovered he was an actor, refused to do the funeral because he thought actors were immoral. And Jefferson sort of pleaded with him to help, you know, where could they go? And he said in a disparaging tone, there's a little church around the corner that does that sort of thing. And so they hot-footed it around to there, and the rector said, of course he buried actors, because in those days Broadway was in the 20s and was round the corner from the church. And he'd often, you know, taken funerals or weddings for actors. So it got into the New York Times, I think, or the Tribune, one of those papers, the next day. And Jefferson is reputed to have said, in that case, sir, God bless the little church around the corner. And that got into the papers. And the poor rector of this parish, whose name was William Sabine, was christened by the press as Sanctimonious Sabine. He lasted 3 more years and left the parish, and then the church closed about 10 years later. So it was an interesting outcome to the rather sanctimonious style.
But your home, Church of the Transfiguration, is one of the most exquisite architectural, spiritual places I've seen in Manhattan. I mean, that's what drew me in. I was a pedestrian walking by, and there you were, ready to be the ultimate tour guide.
Yes, it's got a sort of its architectural style is really a bit indiscriminate. It's what I call New York eclectic. It's a bit of everything.
Oh, that's an oxymoron. New York eclectic, right?
Yes, it is, I guess. Yes, but it is its own style, and it's one of its early nicknames was the Holy Cucumber Vine, because it kept on adding bits. You know, there's a little tower here and a chapel there, and so that makes it the more interesting. And the garden, of course, is a great feature, and the fountain, just the gates and all that. You know, it's a charming setting and a little oasis in the midst of a busy city. But of course, it was at the top of the city when it was built. There were fields from there to 42nd Street. It's hard to believe now.
I'm reading Edward Rutherford's New York. Have you read it?
Yes,
and
it doesn't quite come into it, but it almost does, around that whole thing of the draft riots. There's a very famous incident took place at the church.
Well, I think it's worth saying that whether or not you're visiting New York as an Episcopalian or an Anglican or any other religion, it's worth stopping by to have a look in, and you certainly welcome that.
Oh yeah, and it used to be. I've got a postcard of the 4 famous churches of New York: St. Patrick's, Trinity, St. John the Divine, and Little Church around the corner. So that was interesting.
Did you ever dream, little boy in Melbourne, that you'd be heading up such an important place?
No. Not really.
Do you go back often?
I go every year and sometimes twice a year, depending on what's happening at the other end.
Well, I know
I've got a big family, yeah.
And I know you went back for a somber occasion for Rupert Murdoch's mother.
That's right, I did.
Tell me about that.
Dame Elizabeth Murdoch was a great Australian, remarkable woman. I knew her originally through her daughter Janet, and she became a good friend. And she was also a patron of a number of organisations which I was involved and got to know her that way as well. And so over 25 years really, she became a very special person. And I visited her last August, and she was in remarkable form for a 103-year-old. And I was very privileged to be asked to preach at her memorial.
I remember getting an email from you right after the new Catholic Pope, as opposed to any other kind of Pope, after the new Pope was installed. I got an email from you the next day because we were trying to coordinate a get-together, and I'll be darned if you hadn't met the Pope. I'm like, I mean, I know he's a bishop, but how did this Episcopal bishop pull off meeting the brand spanking new Catholic Pope?
One of my brothers said only you could meet the Pope the day after his election.
I shouldn't use spanking and Pope in the same sentence, but tell me the story.
Well, I was doing a course at the Anglican Centre in Rome, which is a remarkable institution in itself, and I was studying there for a week. And one of the places they suggest you stay is the place called the Domus Internationalis Paulus Sixtus, which is a clergy house where visiting clergy from other denominations can stay as long as you're male. And so I was staying there. And
of any denomination?
Yes, at least Episcopal. But of course, a lot of cardinals had been staying there before the conclave, and some of them came back there after the conclave. But of course, he'd been staying there as well. As the new Pope. And he always stayed there. He liked staying there because it's outside the Vatican. And he enjoyed the walk from there to the Vatican, which takes about 20 minutes. And it's right near the Piazza Navona. And so he came back, and as the local press here said, to pay his bill, pick up his bags, and thank the staff. Well, I just happened to be coming down to reception at the very moment that he was arriving. So security sort of swept me into the dining room with the staff and said, wait here. And I was lined up with the staff, and I sort of protested and said, well, should I be here? And they said, of course, the Pope's coming. So he looked a bit surprised when I said, I'm from New York. But it was an extraordinary occasion because there he was, spanking new, as you say, and seemed pleased to see me. So
Well, he's getting a good reception. Is this, I mean, I feel, although I'm not a Catholic, I feel encouraged for the Catholic Church by this Pope.
I felt encouraged because he came across as a very warm human being. It was nice seeing the way he greeted the older staff, who he obviously knew. He hugged them and kissed them. It was just a lovely feel about the whole event. He then spoke to us in Italian, then he blessed us. On he went.
How's your Italian?
Oh, I'm modest. So I think he said something about our families and God bless them, and it was nice.
The family aspect. Maybe it's a sign of my getting older and thinking that times are getting worse and what happened to the good old days. I suppose every generation feels like that. The disconnect between religions. How are you seeing the numbers go down in church attendance? How do we heal these schisms between all our different faiths? No small question.
I think there's certainly in this part of the world, there's a greater connectedness between the great religious traditions, particularly the Judaism, Christianity and Islam, for instance. But also with sort of Hindus and Buddhists. I'm talking about in Western countries like the United States and in Australia, where through emigration, people are much more aware of each other. And through incidents like 9/11 and other incidents, we're being forced to think about each other in a way perhaps we haven't before. I think with the Jewish community, the Holocaust was a wake-up call to the whole of Christianity. And I think from the Second World War onwards, there's a much greater relationship between Jews and Christians. But I think, I know just from my Australian point of view, I mean, there were no mosques when I was growing up, and now there are many. And I think it's the same in this country. People are aware of Muslims in a way they weren't unless they travelled. And I think that, and just cultures being thrown together, you've got to be aware of each other. And I think there's more work being done in interfaith these days, good healthy work. Communities coming to know each other and befriending each other.
And that's the key, isn't it? It demystifies it, and then it's not something scary and alien.
But I'm old enough to remember when that was the case among Christian denominations, when they didn't know each other. There was a great gulf fixed growing up between Catholics and Protestants. And it was only in the 60s, really, that we started to look over each other's fences and say, hey, we actually say the Lord's Prayer, and we actually read the same Bible, and we do a lot of same things in church, And I can remember the first time ever that the local Roman Catholic priest in the suburb I grew up in, Melbourne, came to our church to preach. Well, it was like the millennium. I mean, it was extraordinary. It was such a simple act, but that had never happened.
So do you do that? Do you visit mosques? I mean,
no, I don't. I don't have opportunity, but I could in principle if we have a local prayer house, but it's very foreign. The main mosque up on 93rd Street, 91st Street, I think there's a much greater relationships there between that and other denominations, other faiths.
Do you have an opinion about the appropriateness of the mosque being built down by the World Trade Center site? I mean, do you think
it's near the World Trade Center. I think it's a perfectly legitimate place to build a mosque. It actually wasn't going to be a mosque. It was going to be a religious center, which is a little different. But I still think that we've got to move on. There's always, in a big city there'll always be mosques and synagogues and churches, and they should be there for the people who need them.
The recent Boston Marathon bombings, now that enough time has passed where we are seeing the stories of, the inspiring stories, the feel-good stories of Boston coming together and people coming together and fighting the terrible things that happened. How do we, from your expertise, start to deal with this kind of anger and disenfranchisement that is obviously boiling everywhere we're around us?
That's a very complex question, because I think there's so many contributing factors of alienation of young people, whether it be through unemployment or lack of opportunity or just being out of their context. I mean, you don't know, you can't analyse. I mean, we don't know the psychology of these people who do these things, but it's very worrisome. I mean, it's not only people who are immigrants. I mean, think of Timothy McVeigh and the Omaha bombing. I mean, that's a local lad. You know, what drove him? You know, there'll always be people who are alienated, and one of the problems is that it's so easy on the internet to pick up all this information about how to make bombs and all the rest of it. Right?
Well, technology certainly has changed, and we can have stronger guns, and we can have more surveillance. Are the stories of the horrible things that go on and the joyful things that go on, really, are they any different than what we could read in the Bible? I mean, we've been here, some terrible, horrible stories in that Bible.
There's certain violence has always been part of humankind have always been violent. There's no question about that from day one. Well, from terms of the biblical narrative.
Not day one, but maybe like day 10.
Since the fall of Adam and Eve. I mean, evil's abroad, and there's no question about that. You read your history, and I read a lot of history of the Second World War and extraordinary cruelty and violence, and so it's there. I mean, how you respond to it and how you secure in environments, that's a huge task.
My brother is an Episcopal priest. I know that when I'm confused about like how could this happen in a world with God? How can this happen? And that must be the most commonly asked question a clergyman gets.
Yes.
Tell those of us who are listening what the best answer
I think evil is a reality, and the forces against God is the forces of God. And, I mean, the Christian story is that God is working for the salvation of the whole universe, of the whole cosmos, and that has begun in the person and work of Jesus Christ. That's what we believe. And ultimately, good will prevail. I believe that really profoundly, that in the end, God. But we live in a world which is, evil is abroad, and there are evil people, and evil things happen. There is sin. I mean, the battle goes on, as it were. And I think that those of us who try and work for forces of good through religion and other philosophies which work for humanitarian ends, we've got a huge task.
Now, your church is performing same-sex marriage, and this is, I think Delaware just became the 11th state. I don't know when this will air and when we're going to post this on the net. But yeah, I mean, it's taking on a very rapid momentum, much faster than the civil rights movement of the 60s that I was growing up with. To see all the changes that are coming.
But also it's growing out of the civil rights movement of the 60s. I think that set the ball rolling in this country, I think, in a remarkable way. And I think the whole thing of people seeking their rights and seeking their recognition of who they are is very important.
Have you performed many same-sex
We're up to
unions?
Marriage is not there, more than unions. So we're up to about our 9th or 10th, I think.
In many ways, that genie is out of the bottle politically, and we're looking at what's going to happen. We're living in a I would say comparatively liberal society / administration right now. When we're gearing up for the next elections, is the next Republican candidate going to have to embrace?
Well, I think Republicans already are. I think that they've gone very soft on the issues. I think the anti-gay stance is so political suicide. It's like anti-immigration. It's interesting how quickly debates move, and I think I suspect the next Republican nominee would be foolish to be outwardly anti-gay. They'd lose a lot of votes. And politicians are politicians. When they see that the polls are saying that 56% of Americans support gay marriage, that's a remarkable shift from 20 years ago.
It's exciting times.
It is exciting
regardless.
times. But what you've got to remember, how quickly this has all happened. I came 10 years ago and there was no word of gay marriage. And it's all happened in the time I've been in the United States.
Maybe it was you. Maybe you helped change the tide.
Yes, I'd like to think so.
You can take a little credit for it. What is the most common perception of clergymen? I know from having my own brother be my brother, he's not just the guy in the collar. In fact, I can't think of 10 times where I've seen him in his collar outside of church. What do you do for fun? What's the misconception about men of the cloth? Or women of the cloth?
People are often surprised that you actually do normal things, like you go to parties or you go to have dinner or you go to the movies or theatre or music, whatever. I happen to love going to the opera. I go to a lot of music. They're my chief relaxations. But I enjoy eating and enjoy people. So ask me to a good party and I'll go.
And seizing New York City.
And seizing New York City. I mean, it never stops.
And I actually went to Catholic high school, so I have my own Catholic experiences as well. Certainly the role for women in the Catholic Church is very different from the Episcopal Church and in other religions. Certainly the celibacy issues and marriage issues. What would you tell people who are searching for something to, not that you want to sort of sell, hey, try Episcopal, do you good. For people who are looking for something, where should they perhaps turn? Do they need to go to a church? Do they need to read a book, turn into a TV show?
I think you've really got to experience the practice of the faith. You've got to experience the community. I mean, it's really becoming part of a community of faith. And you can read all the books in the world, but it won't really help you become a participant. And I always say to people, just try it. Dip your toe in and actually come on a Sunday and do it over a few Sundays and get to know it and get to know a few people and get a sense of what the worship's about and hear the preaching and go to the coffee hour, just get a feel for it. And certainly, I mean, then you can start to read and reflect on what you're experiencing. But the experience, I'm a great one for experience. You've got to actually feel it before you sort of can be intellectual about it.
So we're not in trouble. These are not desperate times, are they?
I don't think they're desperate times. The church has always been challenged. I mean, its basic message is not exactly all that exciting. It's exciting. Yes, it is exciting, but it's not an easy message. I mean, it's about a Saviour who died for us. Well, that's not exactly the easiest message to sell. It's about overcoming sin and becoming a better person. It's about helping others and loving others, which is not always easy. And so, I don't think Madison Avenue could do a great job on the church. You could try, but in the end, you've got to actually. It's a question of faith, and that's a much more complex issue. I mean, many people come, but a lot of people don't stay. Well,
Mark Burnett and Roma Downey have made an excellent PR push for the Bible with the miniseries. Now they're talking about making a movie, and it's not quite as. I guess it's all in the approach. Certain sermons are more approachable than others.
Absolutely. I mean,
Mel Gibson, scary.
Yeah.
Mark Burnett and Roma Downey, not so scary.
But I think there are good communities of faith, and there are others that people get turned off. And I think if they come to a place that is welcoming, that is good preaching, there's live liturgy, good music, the place is alive, people are attracted. If it's dreary and dead as a dodo, well, who cares?
It's finding the church that works for you.
Yes.
All right. So there's hope for the world. There's hope for the world, and there's certainly hope at Nelson's to you, the Right Reverend, my friend, Bishop Andrew St. John.